Welcome to the IoT Podcast show. I'm your host, Tom White. Today, we're joined by Rob Van Kranenburg. Rob is the founder of the IoT Council and is considered to be one of the most influential thought leaders in the IoT space. Rob, thank you very much for joining the show today. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Rob, obviously, I know the IoT Council, and I've been a member for about a year and a half now. I think I was with the 500th member actually. But could you explain a little bit about your background in IoT and what made you start the IoT Council?
Yes. Well, my background is a bit irregular, I think, compared to most people working in IT, because I don't have really a technical background. Actually, it's quite different. It's in literature and languages.
Right.
And so in the 80s and 90s, we saw the internet coming as the backbone. Then we saw the web. I started making websites. And then around 2000, I was working in a program on media literacy, and I found this conference. And it said iCube, Intelligent Information Interfaces, Building Tomorrow Today. It was a conference in Jönköping in Sweden. And I went there. And that was the first time that I heard about ambient intelligence and ubiquitous computing and pervasive computing and the disappearing computer. And it was 300-400 people there. It was ethnographers, designers, architects, engineers, computer scientists, a massively interesting bunch. But they all seemed to believe that we would see kind of a world sort of which in their mind infused with technology, so that they were already envisaging some kind of a layer over everything, basically, so that this notion of the digital twin, a little bit that we have now, they already had that in their heads very sort of in a very early form. And I was simply shocked because I was all of a sudden dropped in this environment of people, this community of people that had been basically working on these ideas for 50 years in basic automation, very, very below the radar, very back-end, very automation type of thinking. And now they were sort of ready to come to the front. So they basically had outfitted everything with sensors in the back end, and they were now sort of spilling it over into the real world. So they were showing all kinds of demos of smart environments and smart desks and smart fridges, which we had then also a lot of smart environments. To me, that was just incredibly new and also incredibly scary, because I felt that if such a digital twin of the world was going to be built, it needed to be built with a lot more stakeholders than the people who had been doing this prior to this, because they'd been optimizing very specific environments with very specific tasks, and now they were going to optimize life, sort of as it were. And well, I can recall that the first years after that, I was quite shocked, and then I was quite upset and thought, well, this cannot be just built with companies and corporates. Citizens have to be involved. And so I started reading and writing about it, and about then 10 years later, 2009, 2010, I thought let's sort of set up a kind of very informal think tank type of group, where experts and people who are working on this on their own, because lots of people are finding all these things on their own, can sort of come together and share information. So that's it. That's how it started, basically. It still is. Very below the radar, kind of informal sharing of information between people who are now involved in building this kind of huge smart environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's really interesting to see such a cross section of people in the council. And as a recording, I obviously referred someone to you last week, someone I think that would be really useful for the group and to share ideas both in an informal way, but also from commercial context as well, because I know a lot of deals get done as well, right? So I think and certainly interesting with your background. Most people that I speak to, either in my day-to-day or within the podcast, certainly have come from a technical background. So it's nice to see that you come at this from a slightly different angle, and that's good, because I think, in my humble opinion, if the IoT industry is to grow as much as really it's forecast to, then we're going to need other people from other backgrounds in order to be able to work on this and to cross-train and to provide solutions, be that from a technical standpoint or not. Yeah, it's good to see. Rob, obviously we're seeing a lot of trends about where IoT is heading. I'd be really keen to understand from your point of view where you think IoT is going to be growing in certain areas, and what we expect to see in the next decade as a really kind of prevalent solution in your eyes.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think in order to sort of to understand sort of what it is, IoT, I think you can picture it as the merging of four separate networks. So we have the body area network, where you have all your wearables and all the things close to the body. So you have all this information about health, and then you have the local area network, which is the home, where you have the smart home, and that's what we saw a lot of activity in the cameras and the Nests and the thermostats, and trying to make this entire home into some kind of convenience, kind of a model of convenience. And then there's the wide area network, which is the connected car, which is the car and transport and traffic, and then you have the very wide area network, which is the smart city. So basically, you have the body, the home, the car, and the city. And so what we'll be seeing is we'll see more growth in any of all of these areas. And so doing IoT is you see that you either sort of you're going to be very focused on one of on a specific offering in any of these areas, but other people are focusing on the links in between. So, for example, what Google has been doing from very early on is they had all kinds of apparatus for the body that would then link into the Nest, so that the home would know how you feel. They have a car, and they're in all the automotive associations, so the car sort of is then also sharing the data from the home and the body space. And then, of course, they've been investing in any library in the world and every open data initiative from their existence with Google Org. So it's basically three main areas. Either you're kind of focusing on one of the areas, wearables, home, connected cars, or smart city applications, or you're focusing on being the glue in between, where you reap all the rewards of interconnecting the data and offering a good dashboard to your clients, or you're providing the connectivity. And so we'll see growth in all these three main domains of offerings, I would say. Sort of, we see growth in types of connectivity on the ground with LoRa. I think in the UK there's an 80 million kind of a project started recently with providing LoRa sort of across the UK, sort of across England. An alliance that started that, and then we see lots of satellite sort of work. So we see things happening on the ground, we see things happening on satellites, and then there's 5G that's been talked about, that's supposed to give a massive push to faster downloads of all kinds of applications, to finally kickstart VR and AR in real life, all this massive, if it really gets off the ground, sort of all of that. So it looks like it's kind of it's very difficult to say that something is inevitable or that something will happen, because we see, especially with things like COVID, we see all these unknowns. Mm-hmm. But it seems that even the unknowns are supporting sort of remote applications, and remote is exactly what is supporting COVID now. Is support sort of, it seems that this idea of creating a world in which every object, every person, every situation somehow has some kind of ghost or twin in a database, and you either as a person or as a script or as an actor of some kind, are able to talk and interact with either the real person or in real time the digital replication or twin of that person or object. That is something that is happening now, and it's very difficult to find arguments sort of why it will not happen. So we had these arguments like energy requirements, sort of, but there's a lot of work on battery, a lot of work on electric, a lot of work on finding other types of people, sort of making their own energy with movement and all of these things. Sort of, it's not sort of foreseen that is energy requirements which is going to hold these things. It's also not foreseen, I would say, that we have different generations that think radically different. I think if we look at the generations sort of active now, seems that they're very capable of moving on between all these environments. They're not really calling for going back to analog. I mean, there's some analog, but it's not really as if they're saying we don't want this, we want a different. It seems like everybody is sort of working with all the applications, so it looks like it's here to stay, and that's also what we see, I think, in the investments that are being made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's widely heralded that IoT is going to touch pretty much every industry, right? And there's certainly industries that are more at the forefront of solutions, as you've spoken about, especially with LoRa, MB, other carriers, Sigfox, for instance, industrial use cases. Do you think there'll be any industries that may not subscribe to some sort of IoT initiative, or might be slightly latecomers to joining an IoT based solution for their business? What businesses do you think that may be sort of a little bit behind some of the others that we see at the moment, Rob?
Well, I think especially with what we've been seeing lately with the enormous amount of hacking activity and all these things, sort of security and cybersecurity is a paramount is a paramount factor of deciding sort of what you're going to put online and what not. So what we will see, and what we are seeing more and more, is these kind of going back to these old SCADA standalone solutions where people actually close off, at least build very strong walls between the activity that they have and the internet. But that doesn't mean that they are not kind of digital or IoT type of solutions. It's just that they are building, let's say, smaller intranets that are not completely connected. But I would say that it's quite inconceivable that any type of industrial activity, of industrious activity of people, will be able to be exempt or to escape from this need to interact. Sort of, it's kind of what we've been seeing with the success of open source. Sort of, that's one parallel, I would say, with this entire need for connectivity. If you keep if you build very small or focused niche solutions that are closed, then you'll find that your clients sort of you need to find a very, very dedicated client, sort of that. But it's not. But kind of open source is really ate the world in that respect, and that's because people understand that in order to survive, you have to be part of an ecosystem. You have to partner up. You cannot partner up if you have very different type of operating systems or very, very closed ways of working, because then you can't really share. So I would say, I mean, if you would ever look now at the situation, I think you would say more things like, what on earth have we done in the past 100, 150 years? how is it possible that we built these kind of standalone armies of companies of 400,000, 500,000 people that sort of acted like big armies, that created these brands that basically nobody cares about. We just want appliances that work. I just want a fridge that's sort of doing what it's supposed to do. I don't care what name is on it. Sort of, I'm not really interested in sort of what kind of brand it is, or how it's sort of, it should simply sort of do its job. And so I think IoT and the large ecosystems and the partnering and simply going down to the offering of what the appliances should do is actually showing that this is the normal situation of where you have this kind of cooperation and co-opetition where of course I have competitors, but we're competing on niche kind of offerings, but we're not going to compete on 80% of sort of building the thing. It's like how the Germans are now doing automotive, and all the big car manufacturers are using the same building blocks and the same. Nobody's going to build its own fully owned. See, people are sharing their a lot of their hardware and hardware innovation. And then at some point, I mean, you're going to really perfect your own specific offering. And so I think it's all. I mean, it's really showing that it's not actually this situation which is kind of which is kind of strange. It's actually strange how from the Industrial Revolution sort of we went into these. We sort of spent so much energy in people doing the same things and not working together, sort of not cooperating from the start. And so I would say this is what is happening now is actually quite tuned to how industrial activity should work in a way.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, most industries are going to combine together and use IoT as a platform. And like your analogy to open source, right? There was a big move to open source 20, 30 years ago. And unless I think there was a specific defense related type project or something whereby it's done in a silo, it's probably hard to see, isn't it, that why businesses wouldn't want to adopt or certainly look into strategies around IoT and IoT initiatives. I mean, given obviously the councils, I think last count was about 552 members from various different fields, both seed stage businesses up to enterprise companies. What would be your advice for people wanting to implement IoT into their business for the first time, be that a corporate body or even an initial startup business? What are the key take homes that someone would want to bear in mind when starting this out?
Well, I think sort of there's a lot of sort of waves that we've seen, and sort of if you would have asked this question sort of let's say a decade before, things are moving extremely fast. We would see that a lot of people, a lot of like industries and a lot of companies would develop in-house solutions, and they would sort of look at what they have now, and then they would look at how all of that what they have now would look in some kind of digital form or offering, and then they would look at how do we get there. They weren't actually looking at what would my offering look like a few years from now if this whole environment is going virtual or digital, because that means that you may have to offer something that's quite different from what you sort of think that you need to replicate now in this digital or virtual form, because that's maybe not sort of. And as people were thinking along those lines, then the key bit became storage and sort of because then what do you do with all, are you going to also have that in-house and sort of like that? So, and that was the moment for the big, let's say, cloud providers to basically to rise like the I mean, it's tremendous. So when you look at the situation now, is very much is very much the cloud providers are going to determine a lot of what you're actually going to do if you want to start now, sort of doing all that. And but we're also nearing a little bit, it looks like, the end of that big wave, because people also realize that if you would go to these giants like the Azures or the Amazons or the Ali sort of Babas or sort of all of those, and if you go to them, you're not really sure what you're doing, then sort of within a few years they will actually tell you what to do, because your entire operation will be datafied to such an extent in the formats that are being offered. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just reality, sort of like that. That the sort of the wisdom that comes from that, and the idea of sort of then the analytics and the algorithms that are not coming from you, but they're coming from them, sort of in a kind of horizontal way, showing you a kind of way forward. Is you're becoming a kind of, you'll be tied in that ecosystem, sort of very much, so it's very much, if you would start now, you might as well ask, what do I want really? Do I want to live, actually? Sort of, do I want to have this company, and what do I want with it myself? Because all the expertise and skills that you've had to build it so far are now being sort of have to be matched with some generic and horizontal skills that you don't have. So who are you going to trust in order to sort of to do that? So and then I think from what we see is that if you go with one of these big ones, that you may not exist in 3 to 5 years anymore, and especially not in the form in which you are now, but you may not even exist at all, because you'll be taken up in a kind of general offering in some kind of a solution. So the old question 10 years ago is, am I going to make my product smart, or is somebody else going to do it for me? And it is now already past, basically, I would say. And if you really have to ask this question now, you're in a lot of trouble. I mean, sort of, if it's only now that you actually realize that this is happening, then either you've had a very, very niche offering with a very dedicated group of people sort of buying that, but then, as we sort of at the end of this wave of let's say big cloud, people are now beginning to understand that you can also be more clever and sort of ask yourself, okay, so what are the essential points from which my data grows and where the value is? So where's the value coming from all of that data? And so how can I actually protect what I actually offer that nobody else has, which is my specific value adding sort of moment? And then you can protect that. You can try to protect that specific position of where that data grows into the value that really no one has that you can have. And this becomes more possible because if you're able to identify, let's say, these hotspots of where this value is that you want to protect, then you can actually much more easily nowadays make these hotspots real, in a sense that then instead of thinking about putting everything on the cloud, you sort of build smaller clouds, which we can call the edge, which people are calling the edge. So you can do a lot more analytics, you can do a lot more meaning very, very close to these sources, because if you move those sources to more architectures where you embed a lot of basically architectures on chips, where you can actually do a lot more of all of that somebody else was doing for you. You can do it more closely, and so we see a lot of companies with a lot of domain expertise, moving into these areas where they go to the edge, where actually you decide this is what I need to protect, and then you go from an analog or an environment that's already a little bit digital, and you turn that digital environment into a new environment where you basically from the chip onwards start building every new layer on that chip. So then you basically, I mean, then you have to secure these well, but it's all becoming more tailored, I would say. Sort of. So I realize this sounds a little very abstract in a way, but I think that's what's happening, sort of.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. It's really adopting everything and everyone and every industry. And if I'd have asked you that question, let alone 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it might still have had a slightly different answer, right? And I think given the possibilities moving forward, it really is endless. Just very briefly, Rob. So my final question to you today. Obviously, we talk about endless possibilities here, endless things that we can achieve with IoT. What is the one thing that you're really looking forward to moving forward that IoT can bring, something that you're really excited by, that you could share with our listeners?
I think that's also the reason why I'm sort of why I'm so interested in this, and this is about quality decision making. That's what it is. That's what IoT to me is. And so we're moving the kind of the decision making onto a layer where we say, look, it's not going to be, you don't have to trust me for my blue eyes. You don't have to trust me because I have 100 million. You don't have to trust me because I'm a king, I'm rich, or whatever. Sort of like, we go to a certain domain, and there's some kind of agreement on what's quality information and what's not, and then we try to build that layer with as much as objectively identifiable data points. And of course, there's always going to be discussion, because we can say, well, you're measuring wind, and so why would you measure wind, and blah blah blah. You're measuring this, you're measuring that. But let's say we're measuring lots of points, and I would say we can come to a certain agreement, saying, look, we've been measuring these things now. Can we decide for a little while that we call this reality for a while, and that's how we're going to move forward. So we're not going to move forward because I hit you on the head harder than you hit me. And we're not going to move forward because I got $1 billion and you haven't. We're going to move forward on the basis of this transparent kind of relationship. That's, to me, the reason why we should have all of this in everything. And so what I'm basically working on is trying to get that level of quality decision making in politics, sort of because that's really the thing that is bugging me for quite some time now, and that's also why I sort of interested at the moment so very much in identity and digital identity solutions and self-sovereign identity type of situations, which I think is going to be quite big, not just for people but also for objects. So it's this whole notion of identification is going to be paramount. But the key for me is that how on earth are we now in a situation where any and every industrial activity is now becoming quite loose from this moment of, let's say, ego or money or all of that, sort of like when you go to your clients, when you talk about it having certain solutions, and you say things like, I think we should do it because I think it's best. It's not going to work. You're not going to sell their solution. You got to prove it to a certain point. So what I find really important is to get across that the kind of transparency that we have in industrial systems is the kind of transparency that we should have in any form of decision making. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing that is now, I find very worrying, especially with all the things going on there in politics. We have a situation in which we basically pay taxes to systems and to people in these systems that are organized in parties. These parties are being paid by the system because so it's a kind of a strange situation where of course these parties would uphold this model of, let's say, representative democracy to a certain extent. And so we are in a situation where the most important form of decision making is something that we as people outsource to in one vote every 4 years. Imagine I would go to a connected car developer and I would say, I would like you to give me one input every 4 years. And I will sort of base all the decision making sort of like, I will provide some algorithms, and I just need one input every 4 years. It's not going to work. We need real-time situations and real-time input. And that's also what we need in these bigger forms of decision making. They should not be exempt from that. Yeah. And so that's what I like about IoT. I think it's what we see and what we will see is that we will get a lot more fairness, a lot more objectivity, a lot more transparency, a lot more. You provide good services. Of course, I will pay for these good services. Of course I will, but I will not pay for bad services, and I will not pay for no service. I'm sorry. So like all of these things that we find really normal and natural in the way that that we do, so that people are doing business and industries working, I think will spill over into these larger forms of decision making. Again, sort of, it's only in a positive way. So I don't want to add any negativity to all the negativity around. That would be insane, because it's just sort of there's no need for that. So I see all of that happening. So I'm very positive that what we are seeing now in lots of political developments is the last kind of dying breath of these old systems trying to still act as if they can sort of act with respectability and with some kind of a decency, and basically through their actions they're showing that that's not the case. So instead of in the old days you would have to put energy in trying to remove them and then come with new things. We don't have to do that now. We just have to continue building good services on all these layers of what we're doing, and then we'll gradually basically overtake this entire field. And that's what I really like about it. So also these notions and discussion about control, not control. I mean, to me, they're not really relevant in the sense that let's keep all the cameras, let's keep all this tracking, all this tracing and tracking of everything basically is not a problem in itself, as long as the data coming from that are basically open to anyone or to new forms of governance. And I'm seeing a lot of work in the direction of these new forms of governance. We're seeing it in finance with blockchain type of solutions that are happening. And of course, Bitcoin is now up front of that, but blockchain is underneath and sort of it's spilling over. We see it in the field of insurance, and sort of all of that is where a lot more different type of delegated decision making sort of is going on in the fintech business. So everywhere is happening, and so I think it's not the notion of we're building control systems. No, we're building systems actually to base very good decisions on, and I think that will show through in the coming years. That more people will see that it's not the connectivity itself that's an issue. It's the quality of decision making coming from that. And so in that case, I'm very positive. Yeah.
Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all your insights into this. It's been great talking to you, and we wish you the very best in growing the IoT Council and everything that you're looking to do there. And stay tuned to the podcast and listen to further releases as and when they come out. But we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me, and have a great Christmas and fantastic 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.